It's time for Scripts and Scriptures Disclaimers. Jean Verhoeven here with some very important information. My panel and I just finished watching this film. Some people use this show to see if they want to see the movie, and some people watch the movie first and then listen to us. The list is available at wicxradio.org. If you're part of the first group, then beware, there are plot spoilers in the following discussion. We also have to tell you, while we think they are smart, witty, insightful, and profound, our opinions are solely ours and do not reflect the management, staff, or board of WICX or affiliated radio groups, or maybe even you. However, our panel is very proud of the results. We are not theologians or apologists, but we are movie fans and hope you are too. Enjoy. Ready? Lights, camera, action!
Take one. That clapboard tells us it's time for Scripts and Scriptures. I'm Jean Verhoeven. We will be watching spiritually inspired movies and shows and discussing their quality, insight, value, and enjoyment. I'm so happy to welcome my panel. We've got Susan Stevens, Charlie Saletti, Lloyd Kent, and host of his own movie radio show, Daniel Saletti. Well, we've done fictional stories in true biblical settings, and we did a papal story before. Tonight's movie was a fictional story, not only set in a very real Vatican, but with almost an eerie foreshadowing of a real papacy. Even his name, Carol, sounds a bit like Carol. The Shoes of the Fisherman is a 1968 American drama film based on the 1963 novel of the same name by Australian novelist Morris West. It was shot in Rome, and the motion picture was directed by Michael Anderson. During the height of the Cold War, Kirill Pavlovich Lakota, the Metropolitan Archbishop of Lviv, Ukraine, is unexpectedly set free after 20 years in a Siberian labor camp by his former jailer, Pyotr Ilyich Kamenev, now premier of the Soviet Union. He is sent to Rome, where the elderly Pope Pius XIII makes him a cardinal. Assigned the titulus of St. Athanasius Church, Lakota is reluctant, begging to be given a simple mission with simple men. But the Pope insists that he kneel and receive the scarlet zucchetto that designates the rank of cardinal. When the pontiff suddenly collapses and dies, the process of a papal conclave begins. After 7 deadlock ballots, Lakota is unexpectedly elected pope as a compromise candidate by spontaneous acclamation in the Sistine Chapel by the College of Cardinals, many of whom have spoken with him and been impressed by his ideas and his humility. Lakota takes the name of Pope Kirill. Meanwhile, the world is on the brink of nuclear war due to a Chinese-Soviet feud made worse by a famine caused by trade restrictions brought against China by the United States. A major secondary plot is the Pope's relationship with a controversial theologian and scientist, Father Telamon. The Pope becomes Telemon's close personal friend, but to his deep regret, in his official capacity, he must allow the Holy Office to censure Telamon for his heterodox views. Shoes of the Fisherman stars Laurence Olivier, Oscar Werner, John Gielgud, David Janssen, and Anthony Quinn. So, we've seen that scene with all the snow and ice and the labor camp in the middle of it. What do you think the bishop, soon to be pope, was thinking as the ship took him away from the labor camp?
He's thinking, what's this all about?
Remember, he's been locked up, hard labor for 20 years, doing secret masses with his inmates. And now, as you can see the ship pulling away, what could have been going through his head?
Well, it's probably the same feeling I get whenever I'm called to the back of the store I work at, or even back in school, being called down to the office. What did I do?
Ah.
And usually then they'll say to me, Daniel, stop saying that. You didn't do anything wrong.
But in hindsight, it's like Peter being on the ship.
Interesting. Okay, and he did, well, we will give away that part yet.
Oh.
Yes, be aware of spoiler alerts. What did the premier mean by his intimate process of taking Kirill apart and putting him back together? The premier was one of the torture interrogators before he became the premier of the Soviet Union. And Kirill, by the way, is the Russian equivalent of Cyril, as in Saint Cyril. But so that was his name.
So I haven't been in the military, but I always heard them describe boot camp as taking somebody apart and putting them back together again. And I think there was a sadistic streak in this guy that when he was working with prisoners, he tried to break them.
Yeah, and it was serious because he even said that he, the torturer, it affected him as well. But yeah, evil, I think.
Clearly, there was an implication that he had gone through some extensive quote-unquote re-education in which the man who would be premier was the head of some kind of mind-washing, breaking
Soul
program,
breaking.
Which involved both mental and physical torture. Yeah.
Right. When told of freedom, that he was going to have his freedom, Kirill says that he's already free. What did he mean by that? The premier certainly was taken aback at that.
Probably because he has the grace of God. He feels free already because God's on his side.
He's revealing why he wasn't able to be broken in the prison camp.
That's a lot of prayers over 20 years. When Kirill, Lakota, was being used, was he being used by the hierarchy or by the premier? Was it his calling to be a cardinal, or were they just using him?
It was clearly the premier had an idea in mind in releasing him and letting him go back to the church and making the deals that would get him into the Vatican, because he implied as much. But as to whether that's his true calling, well, that's a bigger question, and God works in mysterious ways.
I heard somebody say today that their ministry was fate and faith put together. Now, Father Telemond, was he on the right track? It's hard to argue that war is not killing, but is God the author of evil and violence? Or was he just caught up in the times and he was like a closet hippie in a cassock? Or what was he? And incidentally, one note, in the movie he's German, but in the book he's French. Not that that has anything to do with the question.
Well, whether it be book written in 1963 or movie made in 1968, this is the 60s either way. So the hippies are taking charge, sort of. There is possibly, sure, I mean, why fictionalize? Most likely, but why can't you have a priest that's looking out in the outside world and thinking, maybe these guys have a way of saying what's right. Maybe I should twist that into a religious point of view, and maybe the cardinals and bishops will listen to me. Perhaps that's what he was thinking. But the fact that I'm going to call him Father Telemundo, for what he talked about, God, the author of evil and violence, I think that kind of harkens back to the shack and God the Father saying, my what, when Mac refers to God's wrath. So, I mean, is he really the author of evil and violence? Or we just blame him for that?
Don't confuse the alleged wrath of God with the evil and violence within the people, though.
But if man, I can see him, if God created man, and man could be violent and evil.
Image and likeness.
Yeah.
So he was trying to wrap his head around that.
Right, and Father Telemond had a view of the world in his cosmic Christ, in which the world was an embodiment of God. Now, that, of course, is a heresy,
right?
And a fairly well-known one. So he's not only a heretic, he wasn't even particularly original. But I mean that's sort of a point that kind of the movie isn't about that. It's just that he's got these very lofty philosophical thoughts, some of which may lead him astray. But he seems to be a generally nice guy in spite of that.
Mm-hmm. We may or may not be able to know the answer to this one, but why all the final traditions surrounding a pope's death? You got the defacing of his ring, you got the sealing of the apartment, you got the 3 coffin within a coffin within a coffin, you've got the 9 days of masses, you've got something, there was some other insignia or something that was broken. Why all the final traditions? Why do we need them all?
Well, why do you have any of the traditions for anybody else? I mean, if this is an important figure to a pretty darn big bunch of people, I mean, why wouldn't you give him the respect in death as you do in life? I mean...
But you're kind of erasing him, by breaking his ring and sealing his apartment and...
Well, I mean, you don't take the President of the United States body and, chuck it with the other ones. You give him the respect. You put the flag on it, you have a nice big ceremony, you adorn the office and, you take some of his relics out of the way, maybe put him in a museum, but you take his relics away, you strip down the office, and, now let's bring in the new guy here, or vote in the new guy. You just don't say, oh, okay, another dead president, put him in some random cemetery, it's fine.
And he's Peter. And he's Peter on earth.
So,
And they're giving him the burial that they wish they would have given the original Peter. Because wasn't the original Peter crucified upside down?
Upside down,
yes.
Yep.
And so they're giving him what they wanted the first Peter to have.
Exactly. So give him the respect that you would. And then, if it's been going on for so many years, yes, it happens, but some traditions fall out. But with the tradition of the Catholic Church, that's something that should stay.
Okay, fair enough. Getting back to Father Telemann, why do you think Carol had such a bond with Father Telemann? Now, do you think it was because it was a rescue attempt, or did he just agree? I mean, Carol rescuing Father. Did he agree with him on things underneath it all and didn't want to say? Or was it merely they bonded because he was the first friend he had outside of the labor camp during freedom?
I think it was Carol's experience that he had started life with the family life, and then he was in prison. He was in a different situation and had been kept away from the traditions, and then meet Father Telemann, who is thinking outside the box, and they have something in common. They've got an experience outside of the regiment of the formality of, of the
that's a good one.
church. So they had a lot to talk about, a lot of concepts.
And Carol was caught in a time warp because for 20 years, he didn't know what was going on in the outside world.
I was thinking they were also both victims in one way or another of an authoritative oppression.
Oh, yeah.
Because Dave, was it Telemann?
David,
was, felt his, intellectual work was being suppressed by the church for being heretical. And of course, while Kirill, it's, obviously his whole religion is being suppressed by the Soviet regime.
And they were both outsiders to the
Right.
Vatican.
And he, along with the dresser, are the only ones that didn't have an agenda.
What was that guy? Billy?
Yeah.
His valet.
Right.
Jalicio?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Jalicio.
Do we still want, as Catholics, and need the pageantry, the tradition? I mean, why? Wouldn't it be cheaper and faster to elect a pope, via Zoom?
I think it's part of the human condition. We just like the structure of tradition. We got the Bible, and then we got the Catechism, and we got some things that we do that may not be necessary for salvation, but it sure feels good when we do them, and it reminds us. So I'm sure the pageantry makes us more aware of who we are.
And it's something about, rather than Zoom, you're locked into this. Obviously, I never knew what that room. It's a pretty nice room, and you get to eat and drink or whatever. But,
And smoke.
and smoke. But you're in this room together, and it's this Holy Spirit. I mean, I believe you have that many cardinals in there. The Holy Spirit must be moving around.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Well,
and they're all praying, I'm sure.
Well, and again, why would you break with the tradition? I mean, we're fascinated by other religions and other cultures' traditions. Why can't we do the same for those people? Why can't we demonstrate, hey, this is something cool we do?
You know, the last couple of popes, I think, have kind of chipped away at their own tradition, the tradition of the office, or at least the tradition of the coronation and when they make their entrance for the first time, it's getting less formal and less formal.
You mean the little Opel car?
No, the balcony, but yeah.
The Pope-mobile.
The Pope-mobile. So some of the popes themselves are chipping away, and I'm afraid it might follow suit, but who knows, you know. Okay, so why was the Vatican so important to that communist premier? And its importance to the future with China. I mean, today, there are allegations of deals with communist countries with a financial impact. There's corrupt clergy creating deals and plans for the future. I'll let you look those up. My point is that this was 50 or 60 years ago, and we're still having the same MO and the same problems today. So why was it so important? Why was the Vatican such an important role to the communist?
Because I think, well, at least one little aspect of it could be, this is 1960 whatever, book or movie, 1960 whatever, Russians, and now they have a Russian in the Vatican, and so they're thinking, oh, this is good, now we can get some recognition, and maybe even get some people's eye, because if this guy gets any bigger, like, oh, I don't know, Pope, maybe we'll either get some respect or maybe we'll draw some deals, because in the 60s a lot of people don't like us.
Do you think he was a puppet then?
And what was the deal? Remember, said he was released. What was the deal?
At points he might have been a puppet. That might have been one of their first,
Or at least hope to be a puppet?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe that's one of their first ideas, like, This might be an idea to get him into Vatican.
But what did they each side give? They gave.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
What did?
yeah, I mean, presumably, unless you read something into the movie that wasn't there, that they had the previous pope assassinated somehow.
Yeah.
You know, but presumably the deal was to get him within earshot of the pontiff, and you know, it was sort of interesting because the Soviet Union's problem was one that, in a way, couldn't easily be solved by an direct appeal to nations, because they would want to, well, use military responses, and that was specifically what he thought would not work. And so he was looking for another solution and thought maybe this would be a shot at it.
And this was real smart on the part of the Russian leader to, as he said, get somebody in he could communicate with that would, he wouldn't, before he had said he broke them down, put them back together, he knew them. They had a intimate understanding of each other, and now he's got somebody that's there that
Right.
They can't fool him. How he knew in advance that he was going to be the Russian leader and this Cyril was going to be Pope, but he put the possibility in place in advance.
To be fair, they were trying to prevent a war between China and Russia and the other Asian countries. Okay, so this was actually happening before the big cultural revolution of the 60s. Actually, it hit its stride. One cardinal says the younger priests see injustice and want to change, but that was the fear. The other cardinal says that they actually might make more injustice by going down this road. Do you think they would have, and how? Because were they talking about social injustice as the church defines it, capital S, capital I, or or were they defining social injustice as, or social justice, I guess, as tradition does? What do you think?
That's an interesting question, because I'm sure at the time of the movie, the term social justice was not something that was...
Yeah, it was really more of the 70s, I think, that came in.
That was not something that was really talked about in the way that we think about it.
Traditionally, what would you say social justice is?
I mean, you mean the modern sense of it?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
not the way the church defines it, but...
Well, there's probably a textbook definition, but the way that it's usually thought of is, lumping, creating categories into which individuals fall, and then applying justice to and by membership in that category.
But then it seems that the hierarchy just grabbed it and kind of redefined it as, what would you say?
Well, I mean, that's the modern definition that's sort of my own view of it in the way that it's treated.
Because there were
now.
major campaigns about that in the 70s, 80s, 90s, social justice, but sometimes it didn't seem so just, I didn't think.
Well, in general, the sense of it was that it's unfair or it's wrong, not a matter of fairness, but it's just wrong if there are people that don't have enough and can't get it, and that was the general complaint. But then it's abstracted one level, and then they say, well, these groups of people in general don't or have less than or can't get enough. And then by virtue of membership in a particular group, then you become, either a perpetrator of or a victim of some sort of social injustice.
And isn't it? Isn't it kind of? Maybe a lot of people would be well intentioned on that, but isn't that possibly a slippery slope towards socialism? Spread the wealth, blah blah blah.
Well, whether it's that or not, it's simply wrong. Because it treats people by virtue of their membership in a group rather than as individuals. Kind of
reverse stereotyping, or maybe it's not reversing.
So, someone who is hungry, who is a member of some group, are they less hungry or more hungry than someone who is hungry and not a member of a particular justice group?
Okay.
It's so the thinking is wrong and philosophically untenable. But still, there it is.
Right.
And the way that social justice is given out is usually countries that are impoverished is given it to the government.
Yes.
And usually the government decides basically who lives or dies, by who eats and doesn't. So you're saying that particular group, and why is those countries, those families become very rich?
Mm-hmm.
Even worse, yeah.
Right.
Where the people in the countryside are starving.
It's interesting, though, that in this movie, before that movement actually took off, this movie was kind of putting the warning out there that it was the concern of some of the older cardinals that the younger priests saw injustice and wanted to change it, but that was also the problem. It was their fear of the change, that maybe it was good, maybe it wasn't.
And the older cardinals would have been through World War II. In
depression, some of them probably.
And they a little bit hesitant to be too bold with their changes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Carroll speaks of something called conservative Marxism in the Soviet Union. He then hopes for work for all, bread for all, dignity for all. Would that be an authentic Christian revolution, or is that something else? Again, I hear whispers of the S word there.
Well, it's beyond socialism. It's flat out Marxism, and the idea of any of that is not inherently unchristian. The emphasis on only that is.
Because let's remember this Pope was brought up in under a communist regime, or at least lived under a communist regime. I don't know if he was brought up under it, but. So now we have this young-ish foreign pope who has lived under communism. Does that sound familiar at all?
Nope, can't say it does.
Plus, he kept his own name. He was born Kirill, and he kept Kirill, which I'm not sure. I think they said it was done one other time. Why keep it? Why didn't he keep it? Why, as a pope, he's almost a new person, a new identity. When he accepts the nomination or whatever it is, and they take him off into that other room, the first thing they do is change his clothes, usually change his name, and put him on the throne when he comes out. So, why do you think he wanted to keep his name?
Well, I was thinking for 20 years he was a number.
Oh,
And that's one way
that's
of
true.
gaining yourself back.
Also, he's from the scene where they were all pulling a Spartacus there, saying, "I concur." No, I concur. He was saying, "Guys, please, stop! Please, guys, stop!" And so I think he was like, "Well, I don't want to be here. I'll just keep my name. How's that? You cool?"
He wanted to keep a little bit of himself.
Yeah, because I don't want to be here, folks.
He'd been dismantled or whatever they
Yeah.
said before, and he wanted to keep. And Kirill again is for Saint Cyril, as we would say. So, a Manchurian candidate is a person, especially a politician, being used as a puppet by an enemy power. This gets back to what you were saying, Daniel. The term is commonly used to indicate disloyalty or corruption, whether it's intentional or not. Was Pope Kirill one of these, do you think? Was he a Manchurian candidate? You addressed that a little before, but...
Like I said, I think that's what the Soviets were intending on doing, possibly, because, yes, this is fictionalized, but, and especially during any 60s movie you watch, pretty much, or any 60s television show, the Russians are always the bad guys.
Well, it was the Cold War.
You watch those early Connery Bond films, the Russians end up always being somewhere involved. And so, although this being fictional, in the real world, they were the bad guys. And so, Americans could maybe see, I could see them doing this, get in the Vatican, get my Catholicism run for its money there. But ending up, I think, Creole, or whatever his name is.
Kirill.
It was going along saying, well, maybe I had a feeling that's what my Russian people were trying to do, but I'm going to actually be more the leader of what my church people want.
Well, that's exactly. I thought Manchurian candidate when that man gave him the soil and the seed.
Yeah.
It's like the trigger.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then remember this is, you're supposed to do what we tell you to do.
Yeah.
But then his friend said, "You are Peter."
Mm-hmm.
It broke that. And he said, when they were praying, "I am Peter." So in a way, he didn't become. He broke that Manchurian candidate. But I thought that trigger was there.
This is Calvary, and you've just begun to climb.
Right.
Right. Well, and it's also a very interesting choice for a Manchurian candidate to send somebody whom you've tortured and imprisoned for 20 years, who has every reason to hate you and the regime you represent.
But is that where the Stockholm Syndrome would come in, where after 20 years...
No, I don't think it was that. I think it was a little deeper than that, and they kind of spent some time talking about that in the movie, in that the premier really knows Kirill really well. And he kind of has an idea that he will do what's necessary to save millions of lives, maybe in spite of himself. He'll do it. He won't do it for Russia, and he won't do it certainly for the Soviet Union, and he won't do it for the premier, but he'll do it because it's the right thing, and that's why he can send him.
Well, the movie implies that Kirill is the first, quote, insider that the Kremlin had in the church, and whether it was planned that way or it just happened, another recent allegation says there may have been communist infiltration of the hierarchy almost 100 years ago. That's another one that you're going to have to research. I'm not going to tell you how. You'll have to look it up yourself. So either way, who's calling the shots? Is it the Kremlin or the Vatican? And I think the Kremlin had their hopes, but
he changed.
Kirill stood on his own 2 feet.
I don't know. Instead of calling the shots, I'm seeing some wisdom here. That who's got the wisdom? Is it the schemer that's the head of the Soviet Union that used Cyril, or does the new pope have wisdom? Which one is really the the intelligence. Which one is? Well, you said calling the shots. Maybe it is calling the shots, but who's doing what it takes to save the people from war?
You mentioned the messenger there that came in with the box of seeds and was it dirt or soil? Why send a messenger to the Pope who had been involved in his torture? And was that a threat? What was that? And
No, the
what does that
powers
mean?
have changed now. The Pope is now...
As a result of that gift, you think the power changed?
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
I think that he was sent to say they realize the power has changed.
Oh, okay.
He has to come and, please can I have an audience with you?
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was humbled even though he had been a bad guy. Probably
And didn't-
was still a bad guy.
What was that? Somebody said you have to be humbled. There was another thing when the cardinals, you have to be humble.
Yeah. That was in there. Right. Oh, Shades of Saving Grace, another movie that we looked at. But this time, instead of the Pope being locked out of the Vatican, the Pope's departure from the Vatican in plain clothes was on purpose. Here we have another similarity to Pope John Paul II, because he used to go out on Good Friday in his black cassock to hear confessions. Not anonymously, I don't think, but also one of John Paul's closest friends was Jewish. Now, Kirill ministers to a Jewish family while he's out doing the town, so to speak, and he does it in their own tradition. What was Kirill's goal in this whole, escape from the Vatican adventure?
I think we've got a theme that's building here of loneliness, of being a single person and standing alone and not having anybody you can talk to as an equal.
Oh, as an equal, right? Because there are no equals to the Pope, right?
Just like in a company, you become the CEO.
It's lonely at the top.
Yeah, it's lonely at the top, and you have to make decisions you don't like.
And the Pope in Saving Grace went through the same thing. Remember, he felt he was not in touch with the average person.
And I think he said it himself. He wanted to hear the yelling in the streets. He wanted to see
Kids playing
see the kids playing and all the good and the bad things out there. And so and that's exactly what he got, was the good and the bad. He wanted to hear Angelo getting called to by his mother.
Well, he was one of 11, so he was used to not being alone.
That's right.
Yeah.
Ever.
Ever.
Do you think the Pope should have worn his pontificals to the summit? I thought he looked very good in them, actually. But would that have given him any advantage or any... Well, I think he saw it as a disadvantage, but do you think that would have given him any advantage?
Well, I think he'd be standing out too much. I mean, wearing those robes all over the place, they're bound to get dirty and stuff like that.
No, come on.
I don't think it would have impressed the Marxists, especially the Chinese Marxists, very much. They were
In his plain military garb, right?
they were. I mean, they're the vowed Marxist atheists, and some of whom didn't have any base in Christianity. I don't think his pontificals would have been seen as just a backward show of false power that would not have carried much water with them, I don't think.
Well,
and although it's his uniform and his look, his pontificals is normal scene white clothing, I think he wanted to be more like a businessman and say more like a president trying to fix a war, and because he wanted to be more professional, he wanted to be a businessman about it. So he probably said, if I'm going to be like a mediator between these two countries, the Pope is not exactly what they want. They want someone who's a leader who will be professional about this and look businesslike. So that's why he said, well, let's do a suit.
Well, we all forget, at the end of the day, while the Pope is the head of the church, he is a head of state. It's a teeny tiny state.
Yeah,
but
true.
He actually is a head of
could
state.
he have shown with his pontificate? That's before he was installed as Pope, the ceremony.
No, but just even his white thing with the short white cape and the white overcoat and all that. The cardinals called him on that, and he says, well, your unusual attire or whatever, and he said, if I look more like them, if we look more like each other,
You could talk.
we could talk.
Yeah.
And yeah. Okay, this one threw me, and I don't have the answer to this. Should the Pope have actually ridden to the summit with the Russian premier? Did that send a message that, he's on our team, or...
And where was his
Okay.
bodyguards, or the Pope is
Yeah.
an entourage or something?
Right,
Send
right.
a Pope by himself to...
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
I thought that was a little bit of movie
Poetic license.
poetic movie liberties. I think they wanted to have a conversation between the premier and the Pope, and the easiest way to do it was have them share a car ride. But in reality, would that really have happened even if he had agreed to go to a summit like that? Probably not.
Okay, because to me, he was supposed to be this neutral party between the two forces, and I thought, this doesn't look good if you show up with the one guy. Oh, I was just giving him a lift. Yeah. So we finally meet the Chinese chairman.
We can share an Uber.
Yeah, right. The Chinese chairman was very clear on two things. He said, the Pope will appear noble and a success no matter the outcome of this summit, and the risk weighed heavy with the Chinese chairman on his decision. Was he right? Was he right that the Pope's going to come up smelling like a rose because he'll look noble or successful, whereas the Chinese chairman is putting it all on the line for trusting, what would you say, non-communists?
Well, it was sort of struck me that they painted the Chinese chairman as very much a guy who was kind of understood risks and playing games and all that kind of stuff and saw the world that way. And he was absolutely right that the Pope was not in a position to take very much personal risk if all he had to do was to go ask other nations to be more charitable to China. Because that's what popes kind of do. And if they said no, he gets credit for asking. If they say yes, even better. The chairman is correct, but he's not exactly in a position to be making demands either. So
The Pope made one statement that we all must cling to now more than ever, despite if there is corruption, if there's scandals, if there's liturgical changes, if there's whatever. We all must cling to the fact the church will survive. And, today we're having so many nonfiction trials and tribulations, both in and outside the church. How do we go forth and keep to this truth? I think it's very hard these days.
It's what I've been saying almost every show. You gotta have faith.
Right.
Just plain and simple.
And the church, its faith would build the church.
Well, I believe somewhere in the scripture, Christ, I'll paraphrase him, comes out and says, the church will survive. And it's also been mentioned in Marian apparitions and so forth. Unfortunately, there's every day they keep peeling back more layer after layer, and there's some pretty bad stuff going on.
But isn't the scripture something when two or more people gather together?
Mm-hmm. He's with them? Yes.
With them, and that's kind of the basis of the church?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Romans did it in the catacombs, the Irish did it out in the fields, and had lookouts, I actually visited one of those altars hidden out. I know it's hard to hide something in a field, but hidden in the field, disguised in the field. And when the British were in Ireland, it was on my cousin's farm. It was it was amazing. I don't know. I think it's very important to remember that we're going to survive, even if let's say they come in and clean house, and we're down to one priest per county or per state or whatever. We've got to remember that, and sometimes that's very hard because then, of course, non-Catholics and fallen away Catholics look at you and say, why are you sticking with an organization that has so many problems? Well, because we were told to by the founder.
But isn't it the century, well, except for Northern Ireland, Catholics used to be persecuted? Isn't one of the few times that Catholics aren't persecuted?
Oh, I don't know.
No.
If you listen to some of the rhetoric in the campaign, there's some subtle and not so subtle Catholic. Look at the last couple of justices. They were persecuted. So I think it's a different form than being hauled away. But You know that poem about first they came for the so-and-sos and nobody said anything, and then they came, and then now they came for me. So you got to be prepared and aware. The atoning cardinal, he showed himself to be human, and it's like he got caught up sort of in what I would call the corporate ways of the Vatican, as well as the familial ways. And I'd like to believe his confession could happen today. We're told anyway, again, look it up yourself, that there's a lot of corruption within the ranks. The same cardinal described the papacy as a condemnation to a solitary pilgrimage from the day of your election to the day of your death. It is Calvary, and you have just begun to climb. There's some strange comforting, if I ever heard it. What did the cardinal mean? What did the cardinal mean by that?
Lonely at the top.
Lonely at the top. What else?
I agree with that.
Yeah, he was confessing that he was jealous of Father Telemund because he wasn't getting the attention, the affection, the whatever that the other guy was getting. But then he just flat out told the Pope, even though I think the Pope was coming to that conclusion, or he would have had his little adventure, you know. This is a hard question, but remember this was set in the 60s, and we're now in 2020. This script may never have been written using the same language if it were written today. Sad to say, we have been tainted. However, in 1968 and before that, when the book was written, the conversation between the old cardinal and the Pope was touching and from the heart. We know what they mean, you know, watching the movie, we know what they mean. And certainly there were scandals, you know, way back when, but I don't think it was quite as rampant, or at least as, spotlighted. They are clergy, they are human, and the cardinal was discussing his need for love and intimacy. And I say that intimacy with a small I, if you will, because I think we're talking about brotherly, spiritual intimacy. Everybody needs love. They need love and intimacy, and when they're cut off from the world and have no family and live and work in an ivory tower, basically. Today, I hate to say this, we would take that scene, with double entendre, perhaps. Listening with the filter on my ears of this day and age, I was like cringing, like, man, they couldn't say that today. But I knew what they meant. So how do you think it was meant 60 or 70 years ago when the cardinal is saying, I was jealous because you gave Father Telemund love and affection and intimacy, and I wanted some of that. It has nothing to do with the scandal in this situation.
Yeah, I can see where there can be like.
But I'm tainted, I heard it badly, unfortunately.
I saw it as just the development of the theme, that here he was one of 11 children, and then he goes to the isolation of the camp, and then he tries to help the Father Telemund, and was unable to, and now he's got to climb Calvary alone. So that's one of the movie's themes.
And I noticed this last speech, he quotes Corinthians 13, if I have charity, and just a loud, I'm not very good at loud noise or something, and if I don't have, is it faith? But he didn't do the last one. If you don't have love.
Well, he did.
Did he do the love?
Well, he substituted the word charity for love in this
Love.
case, which is the same word, basically. And so that's where they're getting. Yeah, it was a direct quote.
Okay. So I thought, so that's the most important thing, is to have love.
Yeah, I mean, but I see where you're coming from, because, like, with everything going on right now, did you hear what he said?
Yeah.
And, it does harken back to Spotlight, really, because that's what happens.
But it was, sure, there was bad stuff going on back then. For 2,000 years, bad stuff has happened. But in this situation, it was the 60s. It was a little more of an innocence, because remember, the Vatican was not anywhere near the Cultural Revolution, and they took them 20 years to catch on to that, I think. So they were listening with
What is this electricity?
Relatively, well, they weren't that far back, but relative innocence and a purity, and like I said, intimacy and love and affection, all with small letters, as in brotherly.
You can, I mean, it's like, nowadays you can say, I love you, man. And you can say that not meaning, I love you, man.
Yeah, I know. But unfortunately, when we hear of all the victims of today that have been victims for some of them for 40, 50 years, it hurt me. It hurt me to the core. My brain let me hear it with today's problems instead of then.
But you could tell that he did love Father Telemann.
Oh, yeah.
As a brother. And at the end, when he picked him up the Pieta.
Yeah. Oh.
That's what it reminded me of. This was his son. This is somebody he thought it was like his son.
Right. Now, there's a whole bunch of questions in this last question. When it comes to the coronation, there was a glimpse of something I would say more Francis-like than John Paul, perhaps. And like Carol, remember, Francis's roots are in a nation that did not always support freedom and democracy. What would be today's reaction to a Pope's statement saying he was going to donate all the Vatican's treasures to feed the victims of the Chinese famine? Would it have been different then from now? Does that border socialism, or does it actually border Christianity? Could the Pope do it without a revolt? The church is kind of top-heavy in tradition as it is. Could they really give those up? And how would the hierarchy throughout the world react? Some in the hierarchy, today, they seem addicted to riches and luxury and second homes and cars and, of course, status, while others are content to head a simple country parish. The Pope, he was very distinct there in his proclamation about feeding the poor. He was not going to hold anything back, and he was not going to allow limits. So I think everything was up for grabs in his mind. What do you think China would do? And would China be different decades later as a result of it? Incidentally, there are articles from 2015 forward that have Pope Francis not expressing his own thoughts on this, but answering with the treasures do not belong to the Vatican, but humanity. So what he's saying is he has no right to sell them even if he wanted to, but he never says whether he would want to or not. But okay, let's go back to some of these questions. What would be today's reaction to a Pope's statement saying that?
Well, I think it would be met certainly by non-Catholics and by a lot of Catholics with some applause, because there's not the idea of the Vatican sitting on hoards of riches, and who knows how much they really are. If they're museum pieces whose value is really just some insurance adjuster's estimate.
There actually is a document, and it says the value of the Vatican's treasures, 1 lira.
Yeah,
to make the point that they're priceless and they're
is it to carve up the Sistine Chapel so it can sit in some businessman's lobby? Is that really the right thing to do? I don't know, but it was struck. I think this theme of the church should get rid of its treasure and help humanity is not new either, and it struck me that this part of the movie departs from reality in a little bit, because you can only think, had he done it, and turned them over to this Chinese chairman who would have starved his own people anyway and immediately gone out and bought tanks with the
well, that's what you said earlier. A lot of times the money goes to the politicians.
Without putting restrictions on how the aid was to be delivered, that the Chinese no doubt find unacceptable. It seems like it's impossible. You can't. All the treasure in the world can't cure man's corrupt and poor nature sometimes, even though you'd like it.
But wasn't there the scandal recently, the Bank of Vatican?
Oh, yeah.
Because one cardinal was kicked out because apparently there's a lot of money in that bank because it's private, so they don't
it's
have
separate
to,
from the
so
Holy
there's
See.
no one knows how much money they have, and apparently it's backed with gold.
Which we used to be, right?
Which is in the basement of the Vatican somewhere.
And I think there was some woman who had gotten a nice chunk of change, so... Yeah.
Well, I took it differently. I took the all to be a symbolic all and not a account of assets. That it was just saying that the church would make an all-out effort to help the poor people of China. That seems like a whole other topic, and I just like to take it figuratively and say that we're going to help in any way that we can.
Well, that sounds more like Christianity, whereas selling everything... Well, of course, these people were in dire need. I don't want to call it socialism when there's a true cause of famine and hunger and starvation, but it is sort of taking from the rich to give to the poor without everybody getting a say in it, you know.
I mean, it's not socialism in that it's not enforced by a repressive government.
Right.
And you know, so as an act of ultimate charity, were it actually feasible, it's.
But he makes a point of saying no limits, and I'm not gonna,
I do it without.
Not gonna change any parameters.
Without any way to retract it, and okay, I mean that's. So he's taking up the challenge that was laid down by the Chinese.
Does anybody think there'd be a revolt? Could he get away with it without a revolt amongst? I'm not sure who. The hierarchy, regular, everyday Catholics? I don't know.
Oh, I'm sure there'd be some sort of backlash from somebody, but maybe not everyone would join in on it.
Yeah, all generations have contributed to build the Catholic assets. It's part of the tradition of the family to build those assets. So there are things there that couldn't be replaced.
Yeah, I mean, Ark of the Covenant and the alien down there? No, I'm kidding.
But private people have done it. Who is the nun? Oh, she's from a rich heiress in Philadelphia.
Oh, Mother Drexel or
yes.
Catherine Drexel?
And she gave all her money she inherited to help the poor in Philadelphia.
But that money belonged to her. These treasures belong to all of humanity,
but
supposedly.
This was her trust fund, so it belonged to, I guess, the family. But an individual can do it.
Right.
I'm not sure the Pope can do it.
Yeah, does he really have the right?
Because he's saying he does not own all that stuff. He's not even saying the church really owns it. He's saying humanity owns it. It would be amazing to see what is actually in there. But you made a joke about the Chinese might take the money and buy tanks. What do you really think China would do? Would they feed the masses, and would they have any change of heart toward, I mean, maybe decades later, those who were fed, are they going to have any change of heart toward communism, toward outsiders, toward America, toward...
Well, every of those countries, they feed the army first.
Feed the army
what they do.
first. Do you think generations later, though, the country would have been different? Well, it was the Soviet Union at the time. Now it isn't, technically. The fact that they were saved from a war, is that going to change their attitude toward Rome?
China has one of the biggest armies now, so I don't...
Well, especially with some current events done by the current Pope, I don't know. With the Chinese, I don't know.
Well, you're right. There's been some questionable deals and questionable actions there.
Yeah, it's a highly hypothetical question. However, there's no historical indication that concessions toward a country makes them more sympathetic or less hostile in the future.
Right.
In fact, sometimes it makes it worse.
Right. So in the beginning, I spoke about the foreshadowing of the future Pope. When you watch this film, you want to imagine an Eastern European cardinal, a Slav from an Iron Curtain country, who becomes the first non-Italian Pope in 400 years. And the similarities don't end there. Kirill places great stock in the power of words to change the world, and even the destiny of nations, and makes a memorable speech to that effect during a private summit with two world leaders. This resonates with John Paul II's faith in spoken word to move the world, a faith that served him well during his 1979 trip to Poland, when his words helped launch the Solidarity movement, dealing a substantial blow to the Iron Curtain. And remember, he did a lot of worked behind the scenes with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Here are a few interesting facts. Richard Burton turned down the role. Ernest Borgnine really wanted the role. And you can imagine, and Rex Harrison and Lee Marvin were considered.
Oh.
John Gielgud played a pope in 3 times in different movies, all named Pius. In the book, Carroll was an Eastern Rite cleric. Now, before I finish these interesting facts, there was one scene. Carroll is riding in a car, and he's on his way to somewhere. The summit, or the conclave, I think. And did you notice he had on white headgear with kind of like a veil coming down?
Right.
That was very Eastern Rite, although he never refers to that anywhere in the movie, and you never see him in that gear again. However, in the book, he was an Eastern Rite cleric.
That makes sense. In Russia, he would have been Orthodox.
Yeah, you'd think so. Yeah, our own bishop here is authenticated, or whatever the term is, in both Eastern and Roman Rite. Some of the music used in this film were rejected themes of the composer's 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh,
Do you believe it?
Oh, that's how I know the name Alex North.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
The Pope who died was named Pius XIII, but his name only appears in the book. But you can see it on the ring in the movie just before they destroy the ring. Supposedly, the story was set 20 years in the future, which would have made it coincide very closely to John Paul.
Wow.
But they were very vague. They didn't, date it in there. Anthony Quinn, whose father was from County Cork, Ireland, praise
Really?
us, and whose mother was from Mexico, said in an interview that when he made the movie, because he is so religious, that he had some kind of mental illness experience that people get when they are overcome by religion. Somebody would just say that's the Holy Spirit talking, but let us all pray for the Holy Father in these very unusual times, and let us also pray really hard for the Catholics in China. In the meantime, may the angels protect you and heaven accept you. This is Jean Verhoeven for Scripts and Scriptures.